If you take a look at most workshops about leadership or books, many of them will deal with the topic of self-awareness. The process of becoming more self-aware usually takes on the form of taking a personal assessment of some sort and then utilizing those results to reflect and gain some insight into who you are. And so that might be a personality assessment, a strengths assessment. There's lots of these assessments out there that you can take. And I find value in the personal assessments because they help me gain new vocabulary and some reflection skills. But I always felt like after taking one of these tests, there's something more about who I am that was not captured in that assessment. And that's kind of true of all of them. And it's not a critique of them, really. It's just a basic limitation of what personal assessments can do for an individual, is give you a perspective of who you are, not a complete perspective of who you are. A few years ago, I attended a workshop that was facilitated by Jim O'Brien. It was at Norwich University, and he had us look at our personal values. And during this workshop, what I came away from it is a new perspective on how I could describe who Kenneth Lamb is to other people. Not just my Myers-Briggs personality type results or the DISC results. So I want to walk you through not only what I gained from Jim O'Brien that day, but also some of the research that I've read since looking at the values research and how we can connect that into both who we are as people and how we take action. So the first thing I want you to do is go download the handout that's associated with this video. If you don't have access to the handout, you can just go online and search core values list, and you'll be presented with various lists of words that you can use for this exercise. And then make sure you have some paper or your journal handy to start writing. The very first task I want you to do with this exercise is to look at the words that are presented in front of you and select 10 of those words that stand out to you as your personal values. So I'm going to give you some time to do this. I'm going to put a timer up on the screen. If you finish early, go ahead and skip to the end of that timer. If you need more time, feel free to pause, okay? Okay, so now that you have selected 10 that kind of jumped out at you at the page, now I want you to look at those 10 and pick the top 3. And this is the first part. If you turn the handout over, you'll write down those 3 values at the top of that handout now. I'll give you a few more minutes as you kind of debate this with yourself. Again, I'll put a timer up on the screen. If you finish early, skip to the end. If you need more time, pause the video. One of the things that I took away from the workshop with Jim O'Brien was, how would I know if the words that I'm choosing right then and there are in fact my values, or just some words that really felt good to me in that moment, in that place, in that setting? How would I know if those values are actually mine? And that's where I came across some of the research done on personal values and their intersection with personal identity. And the key concept there that links those two together is your personal story. The questions that are being asked by this are, what experiences have you lived through that would validate your values? In other words, if somebody had been watching you live your life, they might also agree that the words you picked are your values. As you reflect on this and you start thinking about your personal story, that might bring to mind new concepts or other ways in which you would describe your values. And so there's this interconnection between the two. Think about a personal story or collection of stories over time that would help validate your values. So I'm going to put the timer back up there on the screen and give you a little bit of time to just jot down the story. And again, if you need more time, hit the pause button. Finish early, go ahead and skip to the end of the timer. So now that you have selected a story that goes along with one of your values, how do we apply our values in our lives? That usually shows up in the form of personal principles. A principle differs from a value because a value is just a concept. It's just a single word. But a principle is a statement that says how you would act or apply that value in your life. And these are connected to both our story and our values. So as you reflect on your personal principles, you might actually find that there are different words that you would use to describe the value associated with that principle. Likewise, if you're already living certain principles and you've just never really written that down before, you might be able to connect living that principle to a story that is in your past and saying, this is why I do this. Now, the values that you choose may not be simply limited to your own personal experience. They might be values that were taught to you by your parents, by your religion, that grew out of your philosophical tradition, that came from a national heritage, a racial or ethnic identity. All of that could become what you would consider your story if you choose to adopt it. And this is something that takes a lot of time to think about, which is why I'm imagining the best place to be would be sitting on some hill under a lovely cozy tree and thinking about what are our personal values. I would recommend taking a notebook around with you so that you can, when you come up with some ideas, jot them down quickly. Then you'll be able to start formulating really truly what are the stories associated with that and what are the principles you need. As I was doing a lot of this research into how our personal values and our personal story impact our own identity, I came across a Greek word, mythos. And mythos is the word that we use in English called myth, which I associated with a tall tale or a legend or an out lie. For the Greeks, the word mythos was a type of story that was intended to describe what it meant to be Greek to somebody else. So from the stories and all the Greek myths that exist out there, you should be able to collect an idea about what are the things that the Greeks value. My own collection of stories communicates who Kenneth Lamb is to other people. As I continued reflecting on my own personal collection of stories, my own personal myth, I realized that I was also collecting and articulating principles. And the collection of those, some people referred to as their personal manifesto or their personal commandments. A lot of people, when I do these workshops, they feel a little bit like manifesto sounds too communist, the commandment sounds too religious. But one definition of a collection of principles that you follow, that you use to guide your action, is your ethics. Our ethics really do come from our collection of lived experiences, how we have made sense and meaning from that in our lives, and then internalize that into an action plan. So our personal ethics sits at the core of who we are in terms of self-awareness. Sure, we are and we do have personality. We have strengths and weaknesses, so taking a strengths assessment is a great way to give us insight. But I noticed that as I went down this path of trying to understand my values, I was really discovering what are my own personal rules to live by, what are my personal ethics, and that was really important to me. And I realized that it sped up the conversations I'd have with others to help them understand who I am. What we're trying to discover here is really what makes us the best version of ourselves. And for me, this was not done quickly. It really took me several months before I felt like I had identified many of my key values and the associated stories with them, and then finally articulating those principles. So just give an example. For me, one of my personal values is humor. It started early, so it's not just one story, but I remember as a little kid that I knew if I could get the attention of adults, I could do so better by making them laugh. I also found that I used humor to let people know that don't take me too seriously. Because I'm fairly tall and can have a very serious looking face, some people might be intimidated by me. And so I would use humor to say, hey, look, it's okay. It's all right. So those are the stories, both as a little kid and as growing up, of how I've used humor. The principle I came up with is I will use humor to build relationships with others and to help other people feel comfortable around me. So the time is now yours from here on out. Take a time to identify as many values as you wish, so long as it's aligned with a story that demonstrates that you actually have that value. And then think about the principles that grow out of that connection of your past. Why and how do you live the way you do? In what ways? Good luck.